that title there, From Attack to Action. Let me give you a little bit of context here. So Phyllis, my longstanding friend and colleague Phyllis Lee and I, our first careers were at the National Security Agency. Decades. Some of us more decades than others, but in our entire careers were focused on what's called vulnerability analysis. So for the purposes of defense, right, for purpose of defense, finding flaws in US systems, in cryptography, in software, hardware, signals, all that kind of stuff. That's the world that we grew up in. And if I could describe my career in 3 quick phases. The first phase was about the technical of finding those flaws. How do I manipulate systems or take advantage of weaknesses in order to achieve some adversarial? And we were doing that preferably before the real bad guys did something, right? So that's the roots of things like red teaming, penetration testing, all that kind of work, right? That was what I was hired to do in the 1970s. The middle third of my career, conceptually, not linearly, but the middle third was roughly moving into management and getting to see this happen at very large scale. And whatever you think of the cyber world we're in, whatever you think of the National Security Agency, I'm serious. That was the place to be, to see this kind of stuff happening, around the world, right? Who's attacking us? We're attacking them. They're attacking each other. All that kind of stuff really emerged in the 70s, 80s, and 90s at the National Security Agency. So at some point in the management jobs I had, I got to see lots of failure at scale. Lots of, how do we red team systems when we do blue teams, when we observe what other nations are doing to us and vice versa. And then that last conceptual third was spending my days wondering, what are we doing wrong in this industry? Why do we keep finding the same problems over and over again? Hey, we did the test, we told them, right? We scared them, we impressed them, and they weren't inspired to action. What is going wrong with this industry that we keep finding the same problems that we were finding in the 70s and 80s, right? And it's not because we have bad people. There are some really fundamental problems here. So we're going to talk a little bit about our work in our second act at the Center for Internet Security. So many of you know us, but for context, we're a small but mighty nonprofit. Some of us know us as the multi-state ISAC, Information Sharing Analysis Center. We're the center for 17,000-something state, local, tribal, territorial governments in the US. We're kind of the central watch center, reporting, bulletins, advisories, best practices, that kind of stuff. We're also the election infrastructure ISAC. So the same for all the stuff, except for voting machines, all the other stuff that goes with elections. Imagine what that is like. For the last several years, we're the ISAC for that also. And then the majority of the company is in security best practices. What do we do about all these problems? And some of you know us from the Center for Internet Security, critical security controls. Some of you know us for security benchmarks, right? We're the world's largest independent producer of configuration guidance. How do you configure a Windows desktop, a web server, a mail server, that kind of stuff. And we do that with you, with volunteers, right? We're a small nonprofit that can gather lots of brains together, create, and then support this content. So we're going to give you a little bit of background on our thinking and what we've done over the last several years to try to bring a little bit of order to this madness. Let me check the, whoops. Oh, the standard disclaimer, which you have seen many times. So 10 years ago, not quite exactly, but 10 years ago at RSA, this is the talk I gave, The Fog of War. All right, how many of you have ever studied like war theory, Clausewitz, that kind of stuff? All right, Fog of War. There was a book in the, I think, late 90s, Lifting the Fog of War. Right? And it was a kind of a must-read, for my generation of leadership in the DoD. But it was about the emergence of the information age. And we went from sort of like government, remember when we started watching wars on CNN, right? Sort of post-Vietnam and the Middle East. And commercial information systems started to take over. So it wasn't just, government-built radios, government people talking to government people. It was this sort of mass explosion of information and all these things that were happening that now became part of our really complicated, dynamic, fast-changing information world. And so this was kind of the inspiration that I talked about 10 years ago. And let me just you can find this video if you like this stuff online, but let me just give you the capsule summary. So I'm at 47 years now and counting in cyber defense. And let me offer an opinion. Never in our history have we had so many great people work in cyber defense, or great cyber tools, or training, or certifications, or threat feeds, insight into attackers. Oh my gosh, it's incredible for an old guy like me to see what we have available to us today. And yet, yeah, we are getting better. But the bad guys are getting better faster than we're getting better. Why is that? It's this fog thing. It's not the lack of resources or information or threat information. It's the surplus. We are drowning. We are overwhelming the defense. So the problem is not how, the problem is how do I find in this mass, and you're living in the middle of this mass right now in RSA, right? The marketing hype, everything is whatever, AI, ZT, quantum. It's overwhelming to most of us, even those of us that do this for a living. So the key is, how do we behave as a community to help lift this fog, right? Fight our way through it and decide what is really important, what really matters. How shall we prioritize? Defense is always a prioritization game. How many of you have all the resources you need, all the time in the world, all the management support you could dream of? If you do, you're not here at the RSA, right? You're like sitting on a beach somewhere enjoying yourself. So this fog thing is kind of a way of thinking for us at the Center for Internet Security. How do we help people deal with this problem of complexity? And one of the ways that we did this, I'll share with you, many years ago at NSA. So I led the campaign, and I don't know if you ever follow NSA and NSA.gov, but in June of 2001, we released all the security guidance we were developing for the DoD and intelligence community to the public. It was a big culture change for NSA, believe me. It also brought me out into the public to talk to folks like you. And much to my embarrassment, I started to get questions that I could not answer, right? Because I grew up as a vulnerability guy, right? You call me in like a pro from Dover, I get to tell you all your flaws, things you are doing wrong, and I'll give you PowerPoint, and I'll give you PDF, and then I get to walk away with no responsibility to fix it. That is the best job in the industry, but it doesn't solve any problems. And people started to ask me, this is the most frequent question I've ever heard when I came outside the building. What do I do first? Does that sound familiar? Right? You're drowning. I got 1,000 security frameworks and 500 tools to choose from, and 16 consultants give me 25 opinions. What do I do first? I have a limited budget. My boss has a limited attention span. I only have one security person on staff, or none. What do I do first? And so that led to things like the CIS critical security controls and security benchmarks and all that kind of stuff. But how do we produce them? How do we put our heads together with lots of volunteers to think about these problems? Well, let me show you the multi-year journey we've been on here. The cartoon version, which is actually true, of the CIS critical security controls is on the left side of this chart. This is a chart I did for myself some years ago. It was literally 5 geeks in the room. I called in 5 friends and said, hey, this problem is too complicated. People ask me what to do first. Guess what? I am professionally trained. No matter how many things you do, I'm professionally trained to find 25 more flaws in your system and leave you working an infinite to-do list. But I called that group of 5 together and said, what is the smallest number of things that people should do to get started? Do not solve world hunger and peace in our time in one meeting, because that's what security people do, right? They give you giant catalogs. They give you tremendous lists. So it was the opinion of 5 smart, experienced people, which is good. And you capture it and you put it in a piece of paper, right? And you give it to other people, for example. But over the years, we're trying to mature this and make it more data-driven. So once the SANS Institute took over roots of, and Phyllis will share a little bit with you, what became the critical security controls, it goes from 5 friends in a room to 5,000 people on a mailing list. Let's get lots of feedback. Let's get lots of brains to think about this problem, share their ideas, and then we can create a recommendation list, a security framework, all these things that we're used to dealing with in the industry. And then we started this idea of mapping, sorry for the bureaucratic language, mapping to authoritative problem summaries. How many of you read the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report every year? Every hand should go up. That, I don't know what else you're reading in this industry. 11 years ago, from discussion, NRSA was the first time we released the Verizon Data Breach Report, which is great, based on data, well written, funny even. Look at the recommendation section of it, it references what eventually became the CI critical security controls. Right, so the idea was to map, here are the problems that real life data identifies for us. Here are the things you need to do to deal with those problems. I'm oversimplifying, but I hope you get the idea, right? Does that make sense? Okay, the idea was to match the data that we have, which is not perfect data, but the data we have to identify what's important, what needs fixing with recommendations. So we just celebrated, Verizon, I'm sure you saw in the press, just released the DBIR. This is our 11th year working with their excellent data analysis team and lining it up with the controls. But lots of other folks have thought about this over the years, right? So kind of moving left to right in the middle, reinforce this with manual analysis. Look at all the malware you care about, look at a well-configured system, an unconfigured system. You know, what are the better properties? Set up honeypots, well-configured, not configured, et cetera. All those kinds of things. You can experiment, you can test, you can try. Lots of folks have done that. If you know the Australian 8, if that ring a bell, and NSA work, all of us have done that. Set up virtualization environments with thousands of machines, all that kind of stuff. And this is the general path that we have been on, to try and bring more data, more rigor to the way that we make recommendations, right? We still love the 5 geeks in the room. It's important to capture judgment. At the same time, if you look at that bottom scale, that's not very rigorous. Sometimes in those meetings, you've been in the meetings, right? The loudest voice wins, which might not be the smartest voice in the room. It doesn't scale. You can't repeat, right? Get 5 different geeks, you might get 5 different answers. So you need more rigor under the hood for every security framework, ours, anybody else's. We should be demanding this as an industry. So the goal was to move from kind of low scale, low repeatability, et cetera, to higher. So I want to share with you, this is kind of the conceptual model that's underlied our work. And then this is kind of a workflow analysis here. Again, this is sort of a cartoon, but this is the way I map things. This is what's called a concept map. Okay, so think of it as nouns in the boxes, verbs on the lines, right? So we create these summaries from things like intelligence summaries. We are the multi-state ISAC. We have lots of data about what happens in state and local governments. We share data with the Verizon folks. We look at the IT and security marketplace. And from there, we sort of create, here's how people use technology. Here's the sort of general categories of attacks. Here's the classes of problems that we're seeing out there. We focus them using what we call, and that's the topic for the day, the community defense model. Phyllis will share with you kind of the conceptual underpinnings of that. How does it actually work? And we translate all that, right? So this is not just about security, it's about new technology, security and business technology. How does business use it? And the verb that matters in security, I'm a bit of a contrarian, right? We all think if we just share data, we'll all get really smart and we'll solve this problem. Let me just tell you something, 47 years, that has not worked yet. Not at any scale, not repeatably, not over a period of time. The verb that matters is translate. How do I translate millions of data points of badness into a small number of positive, constructive things? That's the real key to this industry, is translate. And we can do that as a group, right? Through volunteerism, through capturing it, like we try to do at CIS. So we translate that into our best practices, which are captured in CIS controls, benchmarks, all these kinds of things that you can get from us. Just download from us with an email address. All right, so this is kind of a conceptual workflow. We start with attacks, because that's what we get to see. We get to see attacks. Lucky us. We get to see attacks every day. It's a learning opportunity every day in cybersecurity. But we have to do the analysis to translate them into action. So that's the way that conceptually you should think about it. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Phyllis Lee, and she can talk to you a little bit about the sort of how this turns into action. Phyllis?
Thank you. So as Tony described the evolution of the controls, I just kind of want to highlight one thing in this. So SANS did take it over, and it was called SANS Top 20. And then there was a spin-off. Tony Sager actually was the original. SANS created a small, not-for-profit, small but mighty Center for Internet Security, and it became the CIS Critical Security Controls. And what is the significance of that? What's important to note is that we are not-for-profit. So we don't have any vested interest. We're not trying to sell anything, and it really helps with the credibility of the controls. It allows us to convene lots of SMEs, security matter experts like you, to work with us from all industries, from all different sizes of organizations, to actually create the CIS Critical Security Controls. The latest version, Controls version 8, was released in May of 2021. We planned it for the release of RSA, We were going to have a big party, but guess what? We're in the middle of a pandemic. And so it was actually virtual, and it was a virtual event, and we had a virtual webinar and all of that. But, you know, it was really interesting, a very interesting time. You know, I actually started creating Controls version 8 when I came back from RSA. In May of 2020, or March, it was the beginning of the pandemic. I came back, my kids' school was gonna close for 2 weeks until the pandemic was wiped out. Then we're all gonna go back to work, go back to school. I was starting to create Controls version 8, and then of course we all know what happened. But what's interesting is that it really helped inform the creation of the controls. And what you'll see is it's no longer the top 20, it's 18, and then I just want to highlight Control 15, Service Provider Management, was added. And the group felt very strongly about that because, as we know, we're all in hybrid environments. We're relying on third-party software providers, and it was really important for us to figure out, hey, organizations need to manage their service providers, and at the very least document them and understand what risk they're exposing themselves to. And so that's just an example of how we try to update controls with current threats and what's going on. Is it this button?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm here really to talk about the community defense model. What is that? And so, like Tony said, we really want to back our choices by data. And how did we do that? We looked at dozens and dozens of worldwide industry threat summaries. So Verizon Data Breach Report being one of them. And the good news is, or bad news, however you want to take it, across dozens and dozens of worldwide threat reports, the top 5 attacks remain the same. Regardless of industry, regardless of size, all organizations were facing and still do face the top threats. As a matter of fact, if you were to read last year's Verizon Data Breach Report, they usually have a call-out section for small, medium enterprises. Last year's report for small, medium enterprises said, guess what? We really don't need this section because you're facing the same threats as large enterprises. But instead what they did was they said, but here are the mitigations, here are the controls and supporting safeguards or sub-controls you should be implementing to protect yourselves. And sure enough, they pointed again to CIS critical security controls. Last week, Verizon Data Breach Report dropped, and again, you'll see CIS controls as recommended defenses against top threats. And so we looked at all those dozens and dozens of reports. We came up with the top 5 attack types. And then how do we translate that into action? It's great to break apart attacks, like Tony says, the fog of war. It's great to look at those different attacks, but the question is that we often get asked, so what? What do I do next? How is it that I can defend myself against top threats such as ransomware? And that's where we look at our controls and supporting safeguards to help inform that prioritization. And our prioritization within the CIS critical security controls is called implementation groups. And so that's how we helped inform that prioritization. And of course, we want to make it repeatable, so we used the MITRE ATT&CK model to inform our CDM, our community defense model. And so we also used community-based consensus to help inform our prioritization. Like I said, it's repeatable, so we can look at the data-driven approach, of course, that drives everything that we do. But we also wanted to make sure that when we recommended implementation group 1, or what we're calling essential cyber hygiene, and we said, hey, do this first, we want to make sure that it's implementable and achievable by also small, medium enterprises. So we looked to our community again and said, okay, we know that organizations need to do these things to help defend against these top threats. But we also want to make sure that those small, medium enterprises, the organizations that need the most guidance, the most help, can also implement these safeguards in IG1 or implementation group 1. And that's how we also informed our prioritization scheme. Just FYI, we have 3 implementation groups. Implementation group 1, geared towards small, medium enterprises, those organizations that don't have resources to dedicate towards cybersecurity, and perhaps not even IT. Implementation group 2 is the next set. Please start with IG1, and then we have 70-some additional safeguards, and that's for those larger, medium to large organizations that are facing some threats and definitely have high-value data like IP and subject to some regulation. Implementation Group 3 encompasses all the controls and safeguards. That's a fully mature organization like a big bank, probably targeted and subject to dozens and dozens of regulatory frameworks. And so here's the workflow. Here's another concept model of how we take data and translate that into really actions organizations can take on their network to help defend against these top threats. I'm not going to go over this whole entire chart, but I do want to point out that what we did is we got these top 5 threats, and then we actually got attack patterns. And so the great thing about being at CIS is we didn't have to come up with those attack patterns by ourselves. We really get to leverage all our partnerships and friendships within the community. So for those attack patterns, we got some from CrowdStrike, we got some from other vendors, other organizations that are much better well-equipped to create those attack patterns. And of course, they created those attack patterns using the MITRE ATT&CK model. And so what we were able to do is get those attack patterns, map our safeguards as mitigations to those attack techniques or attack sub-techniques, and to show the efficacy or the security value of our safeguards to defend against these top threats. And so, dun, 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 our results. So if you look at these top 5 attack types, malware, ransomware, web application hacking, insider privilege and misuse, and the targeted intrusions, that naming convention is used from the VDBIR of like 2 or 3 years ago, just so you know. We pulled ransomware out of malware at that time. VDBIR put ransomware within malware. But because of all the press, and we often get asked, how can we defend against ransomware? And we know that the cybersecurity insurers, they're really thinking about ransomware because of all the payouts, so on and so forth. So we pulled ransomware out. And so what we can confidently say, is that if you implement Implementation Group 1, you can defend against these top threats, which is pretty powerful and actually very exciting for us, right? So anything that we believe a small, medium enterprise can also implement in Implementation Group 1, as well as those large organizations, are in IG1, and you can still defend against top threats. I would say even Fortune 500 companies love this because, as you all know, and as Tony alluded to earlier, not everyone gets big budgets and resources to put towards cyber defense. And of course, more better is always more better. If you actually implement all of the safeguards and all the controls, you're in the 90s, right? And I also want to point out and do a little plug for Tony tomorrow. This kind of work that we did at CIS was a tipping point for a lot of organizations and some SLTTs to implement controls. So much so, and we're the only framework we believe to date that I know of that has done this work, right? And what that has done is allowed us to go to different SLTTs, state governments like the state of Nevada, who has a safe harbor law to say, hey, look at the controls, see what you can do, and they love this, so their state agencies could start off with IG1, not overwhelm them, they're not well funded, so on and so forth, and then slowly, implement more and more of the controls and supporting safeguards. What you'll see in a lot of state legislation are safe harbor laws that mention CIS critical security controls, along with other frameworks such as NIST CSF, will provide some umbrella of protection for organizations that get breached under these safe harbor laws. And tomorrow, Tony will be covering that. We call that reasonableness. What does it mean to reasonably implement a cybersecurity framework to show that you have done what you reasonably can to help protect your data and the data of others? And so, Tony?
All right, thanks, Phyllis. Let me, so many of you are not going to live in that world of concept maps and work. We wanted to give you some confidence and some sort of a peek under the hood that we're trying to build more rigor. Actually, both of us have a background in math, so we have this dream. How many of you share our dream? Someday in this industry, we're going to make decisions based upon data. Okay? I mean, it might happen, but it's complex. This is a complex problem. We've all dreamed over decades, if you've worked in this business, right? Well, insurance will make the difference someday. But it's been a struggle for the insurance industry if you track that kind of stuff. Because we don't have the kind of crisp, well-defined sort of data that underlies the actuarial models that let us buy life insurance and fire insurance and that kind of stuff. I mean, these are complicated problems. But what does all this mean to you? All this work that Phyllis described, right? Again, we're a nonprofit. You can download the paper. This is all available to you to look at, argue, give us feedback. We're putting our opinion out there for inspection, for improvement, or for your use, so don't hesitate. But a term she used several times, I want to just repeat it once, security value. What we're trying to establish, right? That list of safeguards that's in the CIS controls. Remember the 5 geeks in the room, right? Smart people, great experience. What we captured on paper was their judgment. What we couldn't tell you was, for every recommendation, what specific security value should I assign to that? We think we need that as an industry overall. And we need it for some of these kinds of reasons here, right? Security value, why? If we can get this sort of under the hood modeling right, it lets us, number one, establish value for individual things, right? If I do this, what value does it have against this particular technique in this particular class of attacks? That's an important question for us to be able to answer. And we'd like to be able to do that routinely, right, without having to do it by ourselves, but have it sort of built into the way we create the framework. So that's what you saw described here. But it also provides us a platform or a starting point for lots of other kinds of analysis. How many of you have a pretty good handle on, hey, I've put in enough security for this company? Not likely, right? What's the security wizard's answer? No matter what you've done, I know how to give you the right answer. More, do more, because I can find 5 more scenarios to attack you. That might be like fun for security people, but hey, bankrupting your company in the name of security is not really good business. Okay, you need to have a sense for, have I done enough? Am I overspending in part of my defensive strategy, underspending in others? Right? Security is moving, cyber stuff is moving from the domain of wizards, right? Let me call in a scruffy looking person who, I'm not sure what they're talking about, but I know I got them a lot, to an issue of business risk, of decision making. Every dollar spent on cyber competes for a dollar that's not a profit, that's not being spent on reputational risk or safety of my employees or satisfaction of my customers, right? That's the right place for security to be argued. The problem is most of security is cloaked in that fog thing, the fancy language, the crazy acronyms, right? And bosses didn't grow up in technology like most of you did. So how are they supposed to juggle these decisions? So we need a basis for things like, okay, what's the value of one thing? What's the value of a small number of things? What's the smallest number of things that seems reasonable? What's the smallest number of things that have low cost that I could do to get started? All those kinds of things in that second bullet up there. How do I optimize? Right? Okay, I want to defend against sort of everything, but maybe a prudent thing is to have at least 2 levels of defense against everything. Right? We sort of have that notion that some resilience or redundancy is important, but I don't want 5 levels. That's pretty expensive. How do I know when I've done enough? How do I make some sense of optimization? How do I tie it to costs? What are these value things? So these are the kind of fundamental problems I think that we all need to get hold of, and we've done our best to help you with this. And again, we put this all out in the public. If you don't like our data, the Verizon report, and you have your own data, maybe you have data about your sector or the companies that you deal with or your supply chain. Hey, use our process. You don't need us. It's all there if you want to do it our way. It's documented there for you to use, right? What you got here, because I think Verizon, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, I mean, we're using the top umpteen, of these that you would read also, right? You would read those things because you're trying to figure out which applies and how do I translate them to action. But again, think of that as the mass market view. And it's important because they have lots of data, right? They see lots. But maybe, again, in your sector, for your regulatory environment, you have more specialized data. More power to you. You're welcome to take what we have done, use it, build upon it, etc. But if we don't do all this consistently, the thing that eats us alive. How many of you are a little worn out over zero trust as a buzzword, right? Zero trust is brilliantly named. Because zero trust sounds like, oh, so easy. Give me some of that zero stuff. No, zero's the starting point. You have to build trust with every transaction, every process, every person, etc. And you have to have something to build it on, right? Something to negotiate trust with, which to me, as an old math wonk, implies some consistency. What threat do you think is relevant to you? I know what threat is relevant to me. We have to negotiate, for example, if you're going to be in my supply chain. I believe this is the threat that we both face. Therefore, what controls are appropriate for me to require of you to be in my supply chain, right? This is a way of life, this negotiation of trust. So the idea is we need sort of these underpinnings to help us with these kinds of big problems that are out there in the environment. Okay, so a couple other thoughts I want to share with you. Again, this is, don't read every word in here, but we've made kind of a philosophical shift over the last few years also. Okay, there's an uncountable number of security frameworks out there. Is that correct? Right? How many of you have to deal with more than one security framework in your security lives? Yeah, hands should go up, right? There's so many of them. All of them designed independently, all of them requiring different kind of reporting requirements and all that kind of stuff. It's a complicated world out there. Here's our view of this at the Center for Internet Security. Our job is to help you with that. We're not trying to produce stone tablets, handed down from a mountain that are the perfect list of things. Our catchphrase internally is, it's not about the list. It's about the ecosystem that develops to help you achieve the good intentions on that list. Right? Everybody's got a good list. NIST, the Brits, the Aussies. There's plenty of great lists out there of all types of quality. Some of them are made up with 5 geeks in a room. Some of them have a little more rigor under the hood. They're all out there. Study this. At the same level of abstraction, by the way, at the 80-90% level, they're pretty much the same. Okay? There's only so many ways to slice a banana, as my dad used to say, before it turns to mush. Right? There's only so many things you can do as a defender. So there's a lot of commonality out there. But this ecosystem is something we've really focused on building out over the last couple years, right? And we don't do it arbitrarily, we do it to answer your questions. So around the center of that are some of the questions. This is one way to represent our work. And all credit to my friend Phyllis, who's really been the architect of building out the ecosystem here. Because those are your questions in bold italics, right? How do I know your recommendations are effective? We tried to help you answer that with the CDM. How do I learn from other people? Right? Most of us learn best from someone else who's kind of in our situation and been there before and made lots of mistakes. How do I measure where I am? Because I got to prove to the boss, I got to prove to the auditor. How do one of the most frequent questions I use is, how do I compare myself to others? Right? If I'm in an industry that's highly regulated, I don't want to overspend on security. How much are my competitors spending? What's enough? These are all important questions. How does this relate to other frameworks? All right, again, we're in a world of multiple frameworks. I think we might be the only framework creator. We have committed at CIS to try and simplify this problem for you. We attempt to create a cross map from everything we do to everything that you ask us to map to, everything we can find. Right? We're I think among probably the first to cross map all our stuff to NIST CSF and all NIST 171 and all that stuff, but also ISO, PCI, you name it. We do that. 80% of that, by the way, is done by my son. So the second generation to save us here. But that's important, right? Because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? You're going to get stuck with it. You're going to have to do it before the auditor comes. You're going to do it before the boss asks you, tell me about this NIST CSF thing. How are we doing? So the idea is we want to simplify that problem for you. How does this relate to other frameworks? Where are the resources? How do I implement? How do I automate? These are we've refocused our thinking from the best list to how do I help you answer your questions, translate that into products, ideas, papers, services that are available to you. And you can see them all around there. Several of them Phyllis has mentioned. These are primarily created by volunteers given to you. So the model of the center, just to be clear, use volunteers. We're like the professional hub for volunteerism. Create the products, give them away, but we still have to pay people, right? I always say volunteer labor doesn't come for free if you want the best results. So you have to organize it, and that we support the company through a membership model and a licensing model to the big securities vendors out there, right? Which allows us to give the primary content away at no charge to you. So this is the ecosystem, and this is when you think about security frameworks and a program, you should be thinking about this also, right? So it's not about the best list, the best stone tablets, the best, handed down on high. It's about what will help me get there. So just as an example, many folks use our work. Our work is more prescriptive, right, more down in the technology realm than the NIST. The NIST-CSF by design is to talk about enterprise risk management, right, at a company discussion, management, strategy level. By design, NIST leaves the implementation to folks like us. The informative references is the NIST term for it, right? So that's why we're so tightly aligned with NIST-CSF, because they're meant to work together. That's the strategy behind NIST-CSF. So this is, I just want to share with you a little bit. This is another way to think about the ecosystem here. All these things, again, when we think about strategy, what we think about is your feedback, right? Someone once asked me, what's the strategic plan for your stuff? I said, what are the problems you're trying to solve? That's our strategic plan, is we're thinking through, the goal is to help you achieve the good intentions, right? Not to impress you with the quality of the list. So that's the goal, that's the sort of under the hood thinking, the strategy behind it. And we want to share that with you. So the CDM is kind of the centerpiece now of this. It's, again, many of you will never plow through all the details of that, right? And you weren't intended to plow through all that. But if you have questions about it, if you have to explain it, you know, our goal was to give you confidence that we have thought about these things under the hood, and we use them as the basis for how we develop our recommendations. And then, you know, when we're working, I think some of my academic friends might be in the room here too, right? And the idea is this also provides this basis for others to study some of these interesting questions like optimization, like minimization of cost and so forth. One of the things on the ecosystem before was we put out, if you've noticed, the IG1 costing paper. You know, again, costing is a really tricky thing to get a hold of in cybersecurity, but we have done, I think, a pretty good job of to implement IG1, what are the ranges of things you need to think about and the ranges of costs that go with that, right, to help you plan out what your security program would be. So let me turn it back over to Phyllis to talk and help us wrap it up here.
So now you know about CIS critical security controls. Here's our call to action. So it's not just a great thing, a great list of things to do, like Tony said. What are the next steps? And really, we encourage you to go ahead and evaluate yourself against the CIS controls. Everything we have, for the most part, is free. So we have a free control self-assessment tool. There's URL. You can go ahead, and it's a web app. You can log in, and you can just fill it out. You can choose IG1, 2, or 3. We have a ton of organizations that do this. Right now, we have almost 30,000 unique organizations leveraging our tool. We don't get access to who you are. We do get to look at the data, and that also informs us. We can say, what are the top 10 performing safeguards? And the good news is they're all in implementation group 1. So that tells us, hey, we picked right. Organizations can implement IG1. What are the bottom 10? Those are typically IG3, maybe 1 or 2 IG2. And that, again, informs us to say, you know what? Our prioritization is correct. These are harder, they're more expensive, more resource intensive. This is why these are performing lower, and we expect that. And you know, we really encourage organizations to fill out CSAT and really just iterate over time. No one's gonna come by and say pass, fail, it's 100%. We understand that organizations really, you know, it is a journey. And we want you to just improve over time. Many organizations ask us, okay, I filled out this tool, this is how I'm doing, I'm okay, not okay, whatever, what next, right? Where do I put my resources? How is it that I prioritize after I fill out this tool? Where should I be investing to make my scores higher? And so we created, we worked with a partner, we have the Business Impact Analysis tool. For those of you who are risk analysis wonks, I don't want to get into a religious war with you, this does use FAIR. And the FAIR is scenario-based, and the first scenario is ransomware. So what the BIA allows you to do is export your CSAT results for implementation group 1, import them into the Business Impact Analysis tool, and see how well you can defend against ransomware, and prioritizes for you for IG1 where you should invest next. And there's a lot of success with those. Organizations really like that. But again, we love to have feedback. Any feedback you have on our tooling, we'd love to see. Another thing I'd like to point out about CSAT is one of the more popular features is an industry average. So you self-select what industry you're in, and then you can compare yourself against your peers, which many organizations like to do that. And of course, there are a lot of resources that help you implement CIS critical security controls. We kind of hedged our bets. We use CIS RAM, which is qualitative versus quantitative, like FAIR. That's something else that we provide for organizations to help prioritize their implementation, as well as policy templates. I'd like to highlight that because, you know, a lot of K-12 are subject to privacy law. During the pandemic, many K-12, well, all of K-12 went online. And so these poor IT staff went from supporting teachers, you know, a few hundred folks in their school district, to thousands, the bulk of their users being children, which is really great, as we all know, as we try to rein in our children, as I try to rein in my children, and their use of their devices. They had to score themselves. You know, they were using CSAT, and they reached out to us, and they said, you know what? I never created a security policy. I never created an asset management policy. How do I do that? And so we provide these policy templates for those organizations, those small, medium enterprises that really struggle and have never done that before. And so that was very exciting for us as well. And an example of, we get feedback, we know by the time we hear it, it's the tipping point. It's not just this one organization, this one K-12, and this one school district that needs this help. We can extrapolate and say, hey, everyone needs that help. So this is just a short list, and of course we have the other thing I'll point out is our Navigator tool. So many organizations have to show compliance to other frameworks. What they do is they start with controls, and this is a little web app in which you can map to the other frameworks. If you are still stuck on Excel and you love using that, you can also get those mappings in Excel spreadsheet you can download those from our website. So with that, that just concludes our talk. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask those now.
Yep, we'll be happy to take some questions. There's microphones in each of the outer aisles out there. If you don't ask questions, we'll have to come up with some funny stories, though, so please ask questions. I think it's still early for this group here. All right, so let me wrap up with just a closing thought here. So this, you know, our purpose today was to describe this community defense model, right? Our multi-year campaign to bring more data, more rigor, more repeatability, et cetera, under the hood of our recommendations, right? So our recommendations have always been good. We're confident, we stood behind them. But by bringing more rigor, we bring all these good properties like repeatability and so forth. But they also support these much broader goals of analysis, optimization, minimization. Thanks, Phyllis, for the nice plug. Tomorrow morning at 8:30, I'm talking about reasonable cybersecurity, as Phyllis described, right? The idea is cyber really is moving kind of to its rightful place, right? From a specialty area, wizardry, I'm not sure what it's all about, but I know I got to deal with it as a business owner. It's coming into the mainstream of decision making. It competes for resources. It's expected by regulators. It's part of your reporting requirements. It may lead to personal liability for business leaders. You may have to manage your risk through a mix of controls and insurance and avoidance and transference. So that's kind of the right place for us to manage risk in cyber, right? Because that's what we do with essentially every other risky domain of our lives. It's just taken us a while to get there with cyber. And cyber blank, you know, is complicated. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of unknowns. We don't have 100 years worth of weather data to predict patterns of hurricanes in Florida yet. So we're at an interesting inflection point of the industry, and we've been tracking this, helping shape that, and we believe that these kinds of activities, like we've described to you today, are about providing a basis for this as we evolve down that road. So, and again, what we do transparently. We make it available to the public. You want to become a volunteer for us? Give us a call. You know, this is about marshaling the community. That's been the goal of the Center for Internet Security. As I mentioned, Phyllis and I grew up in big government, right? The government will save us. Pay your taxes, don't worry, we got you covered. We did great work, we're proud of it. But this second act is a really different and satisfying one because it means we have to all be involved. This is not a bumper sticker, kumbaya, public-private work together. This is an imperative. We need to do this. So that's why we put all our work out there for you to share. So no questions? If not, enjoy the rest of your RSA time. Thank you again for spending your morning here with us. Thank you. Thank you.
Yay.
Always a pleasure.